Welcome to Sir David Simmons, His Life in Focus. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. In our last episode, among other things, we understood how Sir David, in his role as Attorney General, fiercely protected the sovereignty of Barbados. As he continues now in this episode, we will learn of his transformative work with the judicial system and the fundamental role he played in the construction of the Supreme Court of Barbados.
As Attorney General, we had committed in the manifesto to improving the physical conditions of the courts, including the High Court and the Court of Appeal. I had also committed to changing the rules of the Supreme Court, the rules under which you practice on the civil side. And I wanted some money from the IADB to help with some basic modernization, computerization, and so on. So there were three projects that we conceived of during my time in the ministry. Introduction of new rules, a new Supreme Court building, and wide-scale use of contemporary technology. Now, by that time, we were satisfied that the old building at Corbridge Street could not adequately, perhaps adequately or at all, deal with the modernization that was required. For a start, the electrics were almost antediluvian. So we would have been sailing on very dangerous waters if we tried to do too much with the electrics down there. And the other thing was, that building that was the former Supreme Court had tilted, and the building could collapse at any time. So we had to have a new building. And government identified the land in the former cotton factory and for Barbados foundry area and so on. And we got a new design for a new building, such as you have down there now. And although Owen and I knew that I would be retiring in 2001, he left the date that I was going to leave Parliament to me. And I refused to go until I knew and I saw that the financing was in place with the bank to finance the construction of the new building, and that we were, the board of the Inter-American Development Bank had also approved $12.5 million US for an upgrade of certain infrastructure in the administration of justice. When I saw those two in August, I told him, I'm ready, I can go. But so, you know, the wicket was rolled, the pitch was rolled rather, and it was only then for my successors to come and back and let us get the actual building. And so a lot had been done, even with the limited resources we had. For example, who remembers that in 1998, judges in the criminal assizes stopped writing every word of evidence in longhand. That's when the computer-aided transcription procedures came into vogue, 1998. when I went as Chief Justice, I spoke on the day when I was introduced as the new Chief Justice about my vision for the administration of justice. And one of the things I insisted on was having the Judicial Council function. Now listen, if you ask the average Barbadian about the Judicial Council, he doesn't know anything about it. But in the Supreme Court Act, Section 93, there is a Judicial Council provided for. Judicial Council comprises all the judges, Solicitor General, Chief Parliamentary Counsel, I think. It's a fairly broad-based thing, and then it had one or two people from civil society, such as Miss Norma Monica Ford, former lecturer at the law faculty, and Miss Norma Roach, they served. And the statutory mandate of Judicial Council is to keep the administration of justice under review and to produce a report and to meet at least once a quarter, and that report must be laid in Parliament. Provision was made for budget. Never happened. We never had it. And I said, I'm going to make sure that this functions, because we can't be upholders of the law and breakers of the law to the extent that we are not following what Section 93 requires. So I got the Judicial Council to function, and for the first time, we were given a budget, small, $250,000 a year, but that enabled us to do training for the judges and magistrates. One of the things, for example, was judgment rating. You compare the judgments coming out of the court today with the judgments up to, let us say, 1994, 95. I tell people, look at some of the first judgments I wrote, Locke and Bellington and those sorts of things. I was using a style that was traditional, but it was a little bit stiff and stilted. I brought in 2 Canadian judges from the Supreme Court of Ontario to do some training with us, judges and magistrates. And we were able quickly to change the form and approach to judgment rating and align ourselves more with what was being done in England at the time, but especially in Canada. So that you read the judgments now and you see the judgments are written in an easy style. Easily intelligible, because you know what they say, when you write a judgment, you must be aiming at the person who loses to make sure that he understands what you have written. And so, as I said, the judiciary was trained in judgment rating. We had a website, all of that was created with the judgments up on the net. Training also involved sending the judges overseas to attend conferences and making sure that as far as possible there was an even spread. You know, I put one of the other judges in charge of the subcommittee to look at conferences and so on. And they would pick the people and come to me and say, well, Chief, so and so and so and so. I would seldom interfere with their recommendation. And that gave the judges an opportunity to interact with their peers, their colleagues, not only regionally, but extra-regionally. I think around 2003, 2004, we changed from the old garb that the English judges wore. The wig was optional from, I think, during the time of Sir William Douglas. You weren't obliged to wear the wig, but not the lawyers, the judges, especially those sitting in assizes and special sittings, used to dress up in all this. There's a lot of cloth that you had to wrap around you, and kept you very hot in a climate like ours. And at the end of the day, you look like a version of Santa Claus. And I do not believe that judicial jurisdiction is conferred on the basis of attire. So I like what Trinidad had done. A simple black gown with the national colors down the front and wherever, the cuffs and so. And you could either wear the bibs or the jabot, and that was it. But I thought that as a judiciary at that point of our history, a country that had been a confident democracy since November 1966, it was time for us in our institutions to reflect what we were rather than what somebody else wanted us to look like. So, that was an easy one. And no opposition from the judges. No. Went through smoothly. Not to my face at any rate.
Sir David retired from the post of Chief Justice in 2010.
Yeah. To understand what happened in 2010, I think you've got to go back to 2001, April. At the cabinet meeting, after the cabinet meeting, around the 14th of April, I was going down the steps. Owen was ahead of me. He said, David, stop in here by me, man. So I went into his room, and he sat at his desk. And he had it on his head. He said, look, I got something to tell you. I have an important decision to make in October. And I've made it. There is someone I want you to be the next Chief Justice of Barbados. Just so. I said, oh. He said, go and talk to Marie about it and let me know. He said, Dennis Williams is going home in, this was, 2001. Dennis was going home in October, I think, so I came and talked to the wife, and as soon as I mentioned it to her, she said, well, I will have to resign. I will have to, or retire, because it will not look right for both of us to be down there. And she was the next, as it were, to move on to the Court of Appeal. She had acted once or twice, but she was more or less the senior judge in the High Court. And Chief Justice usually sits most of his time in the Court of Appeal. So that would not, the optics of that would be complete anathema to right-thinking people. And she said, no problem. She has in her 33 or she would have in her 33 and 30 years, and whatever else. So I went back and told him, no problem. Marie will have to retire. He said, all right, I'll talk to Thompson. We went to Parliament, and before the session started, I was leading the House in those days. Before the session started, David Thompson went into Owen's office, and then he came out, and as he was walking across to take his seat, which would be almost opposite to me, he gave me a thumbs up and he smiled. I know what it was about. When Owen came there and sat next to me, he said, I told David Thompson about the CJ thing then. He said it's okay with him. But I also, he had said about Marie would have to resign. I told him that she's going to resign. He said, okay, no problem. Thompson never said anything to me. And as I said, I had to wait. In my own mind, I wanted to wait until I saw the financing in place for the court and the IADB loan before I left, which was August. And then I gave the House notice that I was going to retire. And I retired, and I went to London and spent a few weeks because I didn't wish to be in Barbados at the time of the by-election for Cynthia Ford. Took myself away because I'm no longer involved in politics. I don't want anybody to associate me remotely with the campaign and so on. And one of the things I did in England was to prepare myself by going to Lincoln's Inn and reading the West Indian reports. Try to catch up, particularly on the criminal side, because as AG, you don't have a lot of time to be reading law, contemporary law. So I caught up and tried to catch up, and then when I came back, of course, and so I was clear about a number of things. And I was shocked that Thompson opposed the appointment, having earlier agreed. But I go further. He went to Gem Travel to buy a ticket and dealt with my sister. And she said to him, or he said to her, oh, by the way, David is going to be next Chief Justice. I don't have any problem with that. She called here the morning after and said to Marie, but you didn't even tell me that David is going to be Chief Justice. We had not said a word to anybody. And having said what he said to my sister and to the Prime Minister, and having given me a thumbs up, when the by-election came, he took a completely different stance. As I was not here, I could only hear things that people phone and tell me and stuff, but all right. Anyhow, I went and I tried to be impartial and to do the job to the best of my ability. I think I did. And in 2009, I got a message that he had said that if I want to be extended, because I was, you know, you go up to 70, but you can then rate the Prime Minister and apply for an extension of 2 years. And he sent a message to me that if I wanted an extension, no problem. you'd give it. In, I think it was February or March 2009. I was in his study working, and he called one evening. He wanted to speak to me about some case that was in the system, and it appeared to be languishing and going nowhere and so on. And perhaps I could have a look at it because the land involved was important. The government wanted to develop the land, and there was some dispute, and the lawyers were adjourning and adjourning and adjourning, and nothing was happening. When he was finished, I said to him, Prime Minister, are you still of the same mind as last November you sent the message to me about the extension? He said, of course, David, send me the application. I said, but sir, at this time it would look a little bit odd. I can go until April next year. For me to be asking for an extension 14, 15 months in advance, you don't think that would look a little bit odd? I would prefer closer to the time. He said to me, well, yeah, I understand that, but you know how it is. People will start lining up. I didn't pay any attention to that. And then, in the summer, the Friday before Kaduman, 2009, we had a meeting at Elara Court that I had requested with himself, Capsec, Mr. Stewart as the AG, and various other officials to discuss the urgent need. Things were tight, but we needed certain technical people to work the technology that was coming to support the new court. So I needed 3 or 4 posts approved. And so we had this meeting at Elara Court. And again, when it was finished, he said, Prime Minister, may I have a word with you? Just us. I don't mind if Mrs. George stays. Then the Capsec and everybody left. And I said to him, I think it's time now I can send you that letter. He said, please, David, send me a letter. I got in my car and said to my early constable hands, I said, Eustace, it looked like you might have me for another 2 years after next year, because PM says sending me a letter for the extension. I went down to court and I said to my secretary, Joan Christian, Joan, first thing Tuesday, I want you to take this letter. And I dictated the letter there and then. I said, let's get that to the Prime Minister Tuesday first thing. So I said, so I wrote the letter. Now that would have been early August. Whatever day was Kaduman, the day after the Tuesday. Never heard a word. September, about the middle of September, the court is coming to almost the end of its construction. I invited the cabinet to come and see this new court, give them a tour. They came down. And as he and I are out on the balcony talking, I said, but Prime Minister, I haven't heard from you in respect of the extension. He looked up in the air, he looked around, and he said, I think that's coming to cabinet Thursday. Well, I've been around long enough, Sherwood, to know if a fella having me or if he telling a lie or not. Those things never used to go to cabinet. It was a letter to the Prime Minister to the Governor General recommending that so judge be extended. End of story. But there were different governments, so I allowed it. I remember coming home and telling my wife, you know, don't believe that I'm going to be extended. Prepare. Because Thompson said so-and-so to me today. And she said to me, well, that is clear. He hasn't done anything about it now. This is 6 weeks or whatever. So we had prepared ourselves. So when it happened, I never heard from him. September, October, November. The bar had a dinner at the Hilton. I was talking to Mr. Stewart. And I said to him, I haven't heard anything about my extension. And he said to me, others may be going, but you ain't going anywhere. I said, well, okay. Because Peter Williams was going to be 70. Waterman had 1 year's extension or something. So, you know, but about 3 of us could have been going, and it would have weakened the Court of Appeal to have the 3 most senior judges all going at about the same time. Well, I didn't hear anything until a day of Christmas. My secretary called and said that she had a letter down there. Thompson had said that he wasn't renewing my appointment for another 2 years. And then, you know, you had a famous meeting at Lower Court where he said, you might be a good Chief Justice, but if you start wrong, you can't end right, or something that they say. But that was, it didn't bother me at all. You see, if I had not prepared myself for it, I perhaps would have felt humiliated and upset. Boy, and life is so funny, you know, as they say, one door closes and another opens. Within weeks, I was being flooded with offers to do this and do that, including the Commission of Inquiry in Trinidad, Abu Bakr with the attempted coup in 1990, and then subsequent to that, the one in Jamaica with Dudley School. So I'm happy and cool.
Happy and cool. If you could look back on your career, your work and your contribution to your nation and use those 2 words to describe your state, then no doubt you are a fine example to be followed. The life story of our retired Chief Justice as told by the gentleman himself, Sir David Simmons. Sir David Simmons, his life in focus. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time.